Hello everyone, James Donaldson here, and I'm doing a special thing for this video. Basically the only face you'll see is the face of my watches. Primarily this beautiful Hogger Aquamariner, as you see me wearing in most of my content. Anyway, ways to support me are on Patreon, Instagram, TikTok, or by liking and subscribing on YouTube. Our gentleman's introduction, we'll be talking about watches and to some degree wrist devices, wrist GPS devices, as they're kind of one and the same at this point in some cases. And then we'll also talk about the cases where they're not one and the same. Now, I would say that location is irrelevant without time. That said, it can be very important to be at a certain place at a certain time. And in my mind, that's what makes these things blending together for everybody. Onward. So, getting into the meat and potatoes, a watch versus GPS device. A watch. Mostly they're going to be about time and date. Now, there's some other things we're going to talk about, but let's stick to the basics for a moment. When it comes to watches, you're going to have two types, or three types really. You're going to have quartz, which just means battery powered, kind of like this Sterling here. And this Hogger is actually not battery powered, it is automatic. And so you have quartz, battery, or winding, which they can be self-winding, automatic winding, or they can be mechanical winding, as in hand wound. Now, many quartz watches are more accurate throughout a month than many mechanical watches are throughout the day. So that is one thing to keep in mind, where there's a lot of pros and cons to both. Oftentimes mechanical watches, so automatic or hand wound, they end up needing servicing. So that does cost some money. So while you don't have to replace batteries, if you don't wear them long enough, you will have to reset them every time you put them on. And then on top of that, you've always got the matter of servicing them whenever they do need to be serviced, which depending on the watch could be very unforeseen. Whereas battery powered watches, you'll probably be replacing the battery more often than you would having a automatic watch serviced. So with those things out of the way, there are also two basic types. You're going to have analog and digital, which we'll talk about digital in just a moment. Now analog, that brings me to quite a few things. This watch right here is what you would call a formal watch. It has a leather band. They could also be brown, but the big thing is I would say some formal watches, and I will preface this and everything else with, especially in the watch world, there are very much exceptions to these rules. So formal watch is going to be very simple, typically won't have a date. I'm not going to tell you it never has a date. This one doesn't even have a second hand, and I think that's one of the things that makes this watch very elegant. This was a gift from my wife, but it does run on battery and I need to replace it, and that's why I haven't worn it in a while. So there's that issue. Anyway, I think you get the idea. Formal, very simple, and yeah. Now moving on, you're going to have dive watches. These are probably among the most common, especially for people that aren't as crazy about watches. They look neat and interesting. Typically, they're also reminiscent of watches you see James Bond wearing. I would say most of the time he's worn either a Rolex that looks very much like this is kind of an homage to, but also he wears Omega pretty much since Brosnan came in. So Omega, Amiga, however you say it. I know there's some watch geeks that are more geeked out than me, and they're going to correct me in the comments. Go for it. Now, very similar to this, I'm going to roll in a picture. We have a GMT watch, like this Rolex here. It's a friend of mine's. So they don't always have the two colors around the bezel, which by the way, we'll cut back this part around the outside. That's the bezel. The dial is the inside, and you've got the hands and the crown here, and then you have the case, which is kind of the body, and then you have this bracelet, which we'll talk more about retention. Anyway, back to the GMT. So GMT just stands for Greenwich Mean Time, and all it really does is a reference to, I believe, Rolex, and there could have been one before that. Please excuse my ignorance if I am. But basically, Rolex popularized, at the very least, the GMT watch. And the whole point is that if you look at the outside of the bezel versus this dive watch, the dive watch references, oh, my light glares a little bit, but the dive watch references minutes around the bezel. So 10 minutes, 20, 30, etc. And we'll get into why in just a moment. Now, the GMT watch references 24-hour clock. Simply, it's got a fourth hand that references 24 hours. So basically, you can cut it up a number of ways. And there's a lot of different ways that different GMTs operate. I'm not going to get into all that. But the point is you can keep track of more than one time zone at a time. So always 2, by adjusting the bezel, you can observe 3 or even more if you just keep track in your head. This is very popular for people who travel a lot, but especially pilots who fly across different time zones frequently. Some GMTs, you can set the hour hand very quickly instead of just spinning the minute hand all around. Different really cool features like that. One thing I will note, to me, a GMT bezel doesn't make sense unless it's 24, 48, or 96 clicks. And that's because it should be at least 24, one for each hour. Some countries are half hour off, like Afghanistan is so many hours and a half hour from a given time zone. Well, 48 would allow for half hours. Now 96, of course, quarter hours. I don't know if anybody needs that. But anyway, you do find a lot of GMTs, even nice ones, that have 60 or 120 clicks, which makes 0 sense mathematically because, we'll go back to the dive watch, this dive watch has 60 clicks. If it had 120, it'd be every minute and half minute. So you can kind of get the math there. So the reason is because divers can time their dives. So let's say that we're going to dive right now, the minute hand is there, and we're going to dive for 20 minutes. So 60 minus 20 is 40. So if we turn our bezel here, roughly, basically, when the, oh, I totally did that wrong. Excuse me. We put the 40 there, and that way in 20 minutes it hits the triangle and tells me as I'm diving, I'm watching it closer and closer to the end. Now there are reverse bezels, which honestly, if you're counting down, make more sense, where at the very least your marks are over on this side, but also the numbers are reversed. Anyway, that's very uncommon. This is a lot more common of a design. I do like this diver watch because to me it's like a tool. I can time things like a stopwatch. If I say, okay, I've got 10 minutes to go take care of this task, and then of course 10 minutes passes and it hits the 10. If I'm counting down, or if I want to see how long it takes, I set that to the minute hand, and then wherever the minute hand gets to when I'm done with the task, I know, and then count down, of course, I showed you already. So, of course, I can also keep track in my head if I want to pretend this is a GMT watch. Let's say I go to a place that's an hour off from me. So I simply set it off by an hour, depending on which way. And then that's it. And so now I pretend the hour hand, if it's getting between that line and the 50, well, that means that the hour hand is not actually near the 9, it's near the 10. So you get the idea. So another little tidbit of information that I will throw in is dive bezels are typically going to be unidirectional, meaning they only go one way. This is so that if the bezel is bumped, the dive time only gets shorter, so they err on the side of caution. And at the worst case scenario, they surface much earlier than they planned. As for a GMT bezel, there's no need for it to be unidirectional, so it is bidirectional, especially because this makes it easier to monitor other time zones. Anyway, moving on from there, we have casual dress watches. They're going to look a little more like this formal watch, except they're going to have numbers, and they're going to look similar to an adventure or field watch, which I'll roll in here. So basically, it's just got the numbers. It's the most important thing you need. Field watches, kind of thing you'd see soldiers, especially in World War II, very popular watch. Now some, again, these are all guidelines. And then you have your tachometer, or chronographer, rather. And so here you see markings around the bezel. Alright, so using a tachometer. Basically, let's say we're tracking a car's movement for a quarter of a mile. So we time it, it takes it 10 seconds to go a quarter of a mile. Now, we're talking quarters, and so it's not moving at 400 miles an hour. So you're tracking 1 unit. So 1 unit would be a mile. So 400 divided by 4, because you're tracking a quarter, is going to be 100. So the car was moving at an average of 100 miles an hour. Obviously, to do a 10-second quarter mile, you know, you're talking about different speeds. So that's where you're looking at more of an average. Now, if you're looking at a car moving along a highway, so probably the continuous rate of speed, and it moves from 1 mile marker to the next mile marker. Well, I guess moving increments to 10. So let's say it goes from one exit to the other. You know, the exits are a mile apart. So it's traveling, and it takes it about, it takes the car about 45 seconds to go an entire mile. So now, if it took it 45 seconds and you're traveling, or you're marking 1 mile, 80 miles an hour. So now you can use other measurements. So kilometer, let's say you wanted to see if how long it takes a car to travel 1 kilometer at the same rate of speed, and you know it's traveling at the same rate of speed, then if it takes an entire minute, it was traveling at 60. That is how you use this, is it's measuring the speed of something. So this was also something used by pilots. This and the GMT were kind of popularized because of their functions as tools, which is exactly what a watch is. It is a tool. Going back to this diver watch, I find dive watches to be kind of the most useful in terms of day-to-day, because especially if you think about it as a spy, you can simply turn this bezel and keep track of timing and information, synchronize all that, especially being hand wound. Unless you're coming up on a period where you need service, this watch is pretty much going to keep it together for you. You're not going to worry about running out of batteries in the field, as everything is based off of time. So time being your most crucial piece of measurement. Now, I will get into the complications, which are like the date complication, or the GMT. It's a GMT complication is what you call it. And then you have everything in between. Now, digital types. I've got a couple. We've got these. Now this is straight up a Garmin 401 GPS device. It does, of course, have a watch feature on it. And then this is a watch, digital watch. And simply, there's no GPS feature like you would see on a smartwatch or something. But I will say that it is what you call an ABC watch, an altimeter, barometer, and compass. So it does keep track of that information. So, of course, it also has a stopwatch, dual lap, which is something you're going to see on, of course, pretty much any digital watch, as well as a timer and date function. And then some have, such as this one, a dual time zone. Now, I will add that you can use your watch as a compass, but that is something we'll talk about later. Now, illumination. So button versus tritium versus lume, as it's called. Lume has to charge, so tritium is always going to glow. Just no matter what. Just like your night sights, it's just going to glow. Your, of course, button lume. Let's see if you can see it in this light. Yeah, you can kind of see it changed. You maybe see it turn off. So then, yeah, kind of saw it. Anyway. Then you have your lume, which is something that has to be charged. This Hogger, one of the reasons it's less expensive is it isn't covered in tritium. This is about a $550 watch. I highly recommend this. It has gone shooting with me, done all kinds of things. I did get it after my deployment, so I didn't put it through that. But real spies use these. So, moving on, pilot watch, in terms of lume, kind of references that it can double almost as a nightlight. It's so bright. The reason being, you're in a jet or some kind of aircraft, you may not have a light, especially the early ones. And so being able to read your watch easily was an important thing, I guess. That's all my research. So that's one thing to consider. Then of course you have tactical watches, which need stealth. So some of them aren't going to have light at all. Other than it's going to be very dim. Having to charge them is one thing. Of course, oftentimes they get covered up with a sleeve or something like that. Now, let's talk more GPS navigation. So you got your Garmin watches, your Suunto watches. This is a Garmin 401, there's a 601, 701, your Suunto ABC. You know, not a lot to say other than they're going to help you get your location. So that's the main intent of these. As I said, you can use an analog watch as a compass, which we'll talk about. It's even easier with a GMT watch, but this at least gives you some kind of idea to a higher degree. As using an analog watch is very general, this is going to be very exact. It has a feature where it has an arrow that points different ways, or they both point at each other saying you're right on track if you're trying to follow a certain heading or bearing. So there's that. Now, caveats and variables. Let's talk retention. Here obviously is a Velcro strap, rubber strap. Of course, it's a digital watch. I think this is a good way to kind of casual up a watch. Just can't, this watch devours batteries, so it will probably not stay with me much longer, but it's got a band. I like the rubber band on it a lot. Kind of goes well with the black bezel, excuse me. So anyway, but style thing. And of course then you've got ones with bracelets. And I like, I've never seen this on any other watch. I'm sure other watches use them, but this Hogger has a way of adjusting it. So if I push these, this is to release the bracelet. These, if I push them up, it adjusts the watch open. And of course you can close it all the way. I wear mine about one out. Anyway, what I like about this is, of course, you don't have to change the links out, but another feature is when I wash my hands, sometimes I don't like the water underneath. I can simply pop it open, kind of get the water out, tighten it back up. Something else is going on, I want it tight, I can tighten it real quick. Also consider what this is used for as a dive watch. If you're going to be having this on the outside of your wetsuit or something, that's kind of tight. So if you can simply open it up, get it over your wetsuit, that's going to be more comfortable to wear, easier to use. So as I said, I like my watches very functional. Now rolling a picture of what I would consider to be a very functional watch is the Sangen Instruments Professional. It's owned by a friend of mine, same with the Rolex GMT. I know, he has good taste. And what I like about this is it has a GMT feature, and all of Sangen's bezels are 120 clicks, which most of their bezels are technically GMT bezels, so mathematically it doesn't pan out. Now I don't know if they just didn't care or what their reason was, if they didn't know. They are a Marine, just kidding. Anyway, this is one of the only watches you can get from them, at least that I've figured, that has an actual, where you have an option for a dive bezel. So with 120 clicks, you can use the dive bezel. You can still monitor 2 time zones, and if you pretend these numbers are different, you can still monitor more than 2. So I find this to be a really neat watch, and think it kind of breaks the mold between an actual GMT watch, as there's a lot of snooty people out there that have their opinions on what qualifies. I use the term loosely as a watch. You can keep track of more than one time zone with ease. Now, compass accessories come on some straps. That's an option, but again, I would say if you're using it a lot, necessary, but if you don't really need it that often, then I probably wouldn't bother. That's just personal preference. Alright, so talking reflective surfaces, reflective properties rather. So Hogger, on at least more than one other watch, uses an anti-reflective coating. Now, it's glass, right? It's crystal, sapphire. It's going to reflect some, but it's not going to be like a mirror. It's not going to be that bad. Now, Suunto's going to have a similar deal, and so on and so forth. And some, of course, aren't engineered that way. This is a watch for spies, again, so that's one of the reasons it has that. Now, one thing I want to talk about as far as these watches being tools is what does your watch say, right? So you could say you're in a casual mood, or you're a relaxed casual person with your fine taste. Perhaps you just like dive watches, so this is probably the most, if you're trying to blend in, this is a really good watch to go with, because you can time things, you can use it as a stopwatch, you can use it to some degree as a GMT watch, and you blend in because most people have some sort of dive watch, whether it costs them 20 grand or $80. So the dive watch, if I was only have one watch, is probably what I would go with. Now, if I was to only have two watches, since dive watches are also very acceptable in formal and casual settings, then I would have this for when I need something more rugged. Not that the Hogger can't handle things, because it certainly can, but this is a very nice watch. I got it for as a promotional item for my second book, my spy series, Dreamer. And so it is special to me. So even if it was ever damaged beyond repair, I would still keep it, which my wife would hate. But I digress. Sometimes I just want to protect this watch, and this watch I did buy to beat up. It survived an IED with me, so yeah, this watch is pretty awesome. Anyway, again, as tools, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? And how do you want to look doing those things? Do you want to attract attention? Because believe it or not, a lot of people in the army, in the military, spies, they know watches. So sometimes you give away yourself to a degree by having a certain watch. If I was to be in a clandestine operation, I'd probably wear something more like this. Maybe not even Hogger, as it does have spy lineage, but like a Sangen. I'd wear that in uniform, but if I was going undercover, I probably wouldn't wear a watch like that. As again, watch connoisseurs in the industry, they may pick you out. Now, plenty of non-spies, non-special ops people, just regular Joes, are going to have those watches too, but still. If you're in my industry, 1 + 1 indicator adds up. Well, I'm just trying to take away variables for them to count. Now, water resistance, more holes are going to equal more points of entry. So really, chronograph watches, even if they say waterproof or water resistant, don't take them in the water. Can they survive you washing your hands in the sink? Yes. But again, they have more points of entry. There is mechanical movement between here and there. Now, crowns usually have some form of seal, which does wear out for time. But anyway, so these are going to allow water to ingress. Now, bezel clicks. Let's see. Well, I had my notes talk about it now, but I thought it was so important I talked about it earlier in case people bailed on my video, as it is kind of long. Anyway, yes, bezel clicks. To me, watches are tools, so I find it very difficult to buy the thought of buying a watch where they don't have the appropriate amount of clicks for bezel to move to match what the bezel does. So dive, again, 60 or 120. I kind of can't believe how many people haven't caught on to this. And then another note about Hogger, they have a GMT watch. In fact, they've had several over time, and all those have had the appropriate number of clicks, 24. I don't mind 48. Now, people get into a debate, 60 versus 120, which is better. I'm going to tell you right now, neither one is better. Part of it is what you're going to do. Part of it's the execution. Someone could do 120 click bezel and it'd be shitty. Someone could do it well, and vice versa for the 60 click. I like the 60 click because, I mean, look at these lines. I'm not trying to split minutes in half here. This isn't an actual stopwatch. If I want a stopwatch, I got a phone, I've got a Sunto. So for me, I like to just quickly get somewhere and leave it. I don't want to have to kind of, oh, I went one click too far, now I'm a half a minute off. I don't want to do that. Same reason I'm switching my scope from MOA to mils. I want to cut down the amount of adjustments because a lot of times, time is of the essence. Okay, anyway, moving on. GPS and smart cons. Let's talk about some of these. So, GPS, a watch, a smartwatch, GPS watch, 4-1, those aren't going to be allowed in something like a skiff. For many reasons. Mainly is that these watches talk to something. Now this one doesn't. So let's talk about when I would go on mission, I would wear both of these. because this requires satellites to do most if not all of its functioning. This requires no satellite connection. If the compass went down, all the other functions would still work. So that's why I still wore this, even though I had that as well. Now, some people just wore this. I mean, we never had any issues, but again, if something happened to this, or if I had to ditch it, whatever, I still have a functioning watch that I can use to navigate, or at the very least tell time. So that was my big thing, was in case of a failure. So always rocked my ABC Suunto. And also these have horrendous battery life, so if I was ever stranded and couldn't throw new batteries in, basically every mission I put in new batteries in this. And this, I think I made the whole deployment without ever switching them out. So yeah. Now, moving on. How to wear them. So, what I'm talking about here is, of course, some people wear them like this. Some people wear them like that, inside of the wrist. Personal preference. Benefits to this, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to knock the face of the watch no matter what side it's on. So I did this, for instance, when I was on mission wearing this watch, I had it on the inside of my wrist, and when I was not on mission, I had it on the outside because this is natural and comfortable for me. Had it over here because if I was holding my rifle, so I'm holding my rifle here, the face is on the inside. So any reflection that could happen, although highly unlikely, especially in the winter when I had sleeves, was it was still protecting it. Now, outside of that, it really just comes down to personal preference. Yeah, you can see the time if you're holding your rifle. That's a relevant argument. I wouldn't discount that. But it was never really an issue for me. I never had to look at my watch. Plus, I operated, almost all my missions were at night, so I was going to have to hit the button to look at the watch anyway, to illuminate it. So, kind of a moot point for me. So, now let's go to using it as a compass. Now let's talk using your analog watch as a compass. Here I'm using the most simple one. So, I know the directions of my house, so I can use an example. This is pretty much north. Okay, so spoiler alert there. Anyway, so we'll say sunrise is happening about 6 o'clock. And obviously, disclaimer here. This is an approximation when you use this method. So, anyway, we'll say sunrise is about 6 o'clock. So here it is, it's 6 o'clock. Now you point the hour hand the direction of the sun. And so in the morning, point the hour hand to the sun, and on this side of the watch, so between the 12 and 6, by way of the 3, it's going to point north. So you're bisecting the hour hand and the 12. So at sunrise, this is pointing north. Now in the afternoon, the sun is going to be on this side. And so in the afternoon, you use this side of the watch, and this side of the watch is going to point north. And you're bisecting the hour hand and the 12 o'clock. Now, obviously midday, well, you're not really bisecting them. So understand that around midday, the closer you get to midday and so on and so forth, the hour hand's going to point due south. So, a little tricky, but it can be done. Especially with practice, you can get very fast at this approach. Alright, so let's talk using the compass of the GMT watch. This is a lot simpler. You simply point the hour hand at the sun, and then the GMT hand points north. That's about it. Alright, so now with all that said and done, if I had to choose one wrist device for the rest of my life, like I said, I'm going diver watch, probably, possibly GMT, most likely diver watch. So, just like anything else, saws, guns, hammers, shoes, suppressors, knives, clothes, etc., watches are tools. When choosing one, consider its primary use, and then fill in the gaps from there if you have the means. This has been James Donaldson with The Contemporary Gentleman, and until next time, keep your composure.